presidency. Joining me now is Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma. He's the top Republican on the House Rules Committee. You saw him a lot during the impeachment vote. Congressman Cole, welcome back to the
Hey, Chuck, good to be with you.
Let me start with a simple question here. Do you believe there was a quid pro quo?
No.
Not at all, because there is some question. Some people believe there was, and it just doesn't rise to impeachment. You don't believe there was a quid pro quo?
Well, look, the things we know are this. We know the president says there was no quid pro quo. We know President Zelensky said he didn't feel any pressure. We know there's no Ukraine investigation, and we know the military aid got there. Those are things we know. So, no, I don't think there was a quid pro quo.
It's an interesting way you put it. We've seen 5 witnesses just this week that have testified to a quid pro quo, that military aid was being held up over these investigations. And we had Rudy Giuliani somehow playing a private role here. Does any of this, does any of that stuff to you, any of that a concern to you?
Well, a concern is different than rising to the level of impeachment. But again, I look at it this way. The aid is there, and the investigations didn't happen. So if there was a quid pro quo, it certainly wasn't a very effective one.
So why shouldn't the president be held accountable for this?
Well, you can hold any president accountable. You should probably do it through an oversight hearing to make your point. Instead, we're going willy-nilly into impeachment. We're doing it in a process that's unacceptable to most Republicans. We're doing exactly what Speaker Pelosi said we shouldn't do. That is, we're proceeding in a partisan impeachment without a consensus in the country. You know, frankly, I think Democratic caucus just got the bit between its teeth and decided it wanted to beat this guy one way or another.
Let me go back to this quid pro quo, because you seem to say you're taking the president at his word, and these witnesses, you're not taking at
Well, first of all, to be fair, I haven't heard any of the witnesses.
So you want to wait? Okay.
I don't say anything, but I look at it this way, Chuck. I've got 40-odd Republicans, as my friend before me said, that have been sitting in those hearings. They don't think this rises to the level of impeachable sense, and they don't think we should have proceeded in the manner we did this year. So, again, I've got the transcript, which I've read. I've got media reports, which I've paid attention to, and I've got colleagues that have been sitting in the room, none of whom think this rises to the level of impeachment. So, you know, it's pretty easy for me, given those things, to say I think we're off on a track that's going to divide the country and we can't resolve in Congress.
Well, let me ask you this, though, because I want to play for you an array of responses defending the president by fellow Republicans of yours, because that array seems to be sending a mixed message. Take a listen.
A whistleblower complaint is hearsay here. The whistleblower was not on the phone call.
It seems like a fair bit of hearsay.
Had no firsthand knowledge.
There is no quid pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo.
No quid pro quo.
We do that all the time with foreign policy.
The president has had questions about foreign aid across the board, whether it's in Central America or Afghanistan or other places. So it wasn't unique necessarily to Ukraine.
No impeachable problem.
Not remotely an impeachable offense.
I don't see that rising to the level of an impeachable offense.
I think Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana, said it's possible it was a lapse of judgment, but doesn't rise to impeachment. The reason I present all that to you is, what's the public supposed to absorb from this? The Republican Party says, well, no, this didn't happen. Well, all right, maybe it did, but it's not this. Do you see why that some are skeptical of really what the Republicans are doing?
I think the best thing for the public to do is read the transcript. It's the closest thing we have to a record. And you make a judgment as to whether or not you think what happened there is worth putting the country through an incredibly divisive experience that's stopping everything else from happening, and that we know how the story's going to end. There's a very little likelihood that the president will be removed. So we've made a political decision to put everything on hold, divide the country for an outcome that we know, and we're doing it, what's going to happen, and we're doing it essentially a year before an election. I mean, to me, that doesn't make a lot of political sense, and it's bad for the country.
It seems like, though, we're in a bad spot. We're also setting a precedent with the presidency. If there is no guardrail to stop him from, as Peggy Noonan wrote, from essentially bullying, you know, another leader to do his political work for him, and there is no consequence, how do you not prevent the next president, Democrat or Republican, from doing the same thing?
Well, if we want to have a longer discussion about Congress having routinely surrendered its powers, I think that's a good question. We went to war in Libya under the last president without Congress approving it.
Can I just tell you my frustration, how many individual members of Congress come here and admit that to me, and yet collectively you guys have ceded your authority to the executive?
Well, too much, but I think you're actually seeing us begin to reclaim some of it now. But I think, you know, when you do it over 40 years, you don't reclaim it in a single incident. You do it incrementally over time, and I think that's actually underway.
Is there, if there were a middle ground here, not impeachment, but a censure of some sort, you think that would be a more appropriate way to go?
Look, if I were the Democrats, I would have chosen that. But again, that's up to them as to how they want to proceed. Personally, I don't see anything here that I'm likely to have censured the president for. So, again, fair enough. If I think they've made the decision. They want to go for the whole ball of wax, and it's not going to work. But I do believe, as Leader McCarthy said, this is more about impacting the next election than it is about removing the president by impeachment.
Let me get you to respond to Justin Amash, the lone Republican who sort of left the party over President Trump. He tweeted this on the day of the vote. The president will be in power for only a short time, but excusing his misbehavior will forever tarnish your name. To my Republican colleagues, step outside your media and social bubble. History will not look kindly on disingenuous, frivolous, and false defenses of this man. What do you say to Justin Amash?
Well, first of all, I regard him as a friend, and we just profoundly disagree on this issue. I think he's wrong. Look, if I believed everything the Democrats are saying, I would still say this is an impeachable offense. I routinely went home for 6 years, and I think probably most Republicans in red districts did, and got yelled at for not impeaching Barack Obama over and over and over again. But I didn't think he'd done anything, even when I disagreed with him, that rose to that level. Now we're going to do this on a phone call? I mean, I just don't think this rises to the level. And I think my friends on the Democratic side are putting America through a terrifically bad experience, really because they've lost control. They confuse what their base thinks with what the public thinks.
Why is this on the Democrats and their base and not President Trump? Do you think President Trump has any responsibility for the horrible polarizing situation we're in right now?
Look, I think the polarizing situation has been building up for a long time, but I think you don't make it better by doing impeachment, you make it worse. So you can hardly complain about polarization when on what I think is very flimsy evidence, you put the country through a incredibly divisive thing. You stop everything else where we can work together, whether it's appropriations or USMCA. Those things aren't happening right now. I think this is all political, and I think it's a situation where, sadly, the speaker lost control of our own conference.
You have said you have not read all the depositions.
I haven't been able to read
That's right. And if when we're supposedly going to see them all before then, have you closed the door completely to approving an article of impeachment?
Well, you never close the door completely to anything like this, but again, we just adopted a process that every single Republican said was unfair. We didn't do the Clinton process, the Nixon process. So, I mean, I think the way the Democrats have handled this have sort of pushed Republicans together, whether they intended to or not. Now, am I open to listening? Of course. But all I know is that everything so far that's been presented behind closed doors, every Republican that has heard it did not vote for this impeachment process. So, again, we'll see what they do. But, I think this is pretty predictable how this runs its course politically in terms of the impeachment process itself.
Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma. Always good to have your perspective.
Hey, Chuck.
Thanks for coming on, sharing your views. Much appreciated. When we come back, what both political parties have to gain and lose as the impeachment effort moves forward. The panel is next.